again as usual to the third seminar, and we have a real special treat today because we not only have one person knowledgeable in philanthropy, we have two, one of whom our respondent is, I'll mention in a minute. The first is Charlie Kenney, who will be our questioner, a provocateur, and all kinds of other things. Charlie is a real veteran political analyst, correspondent, writer, has done a book on Kennedy, Teddy, on Jack Kennedy, right? Yep. And continues to write both freelance and all kinds of stuff, and really is good. And has been, this isn't the secret about writing a book about you.
No.
Okay. It's not a secret. Charlie is Elizabeth's biographer, and will be doing a book that's going to the publisher at the end of the year, I think.
That's the theory.
That's the theory. So you've heard it here almost first, and it should be very, very informative. Elizabeth is another person altogether. There are three loves in my life. I'm going to be very personal for a minute. And the first one is my wife, who is sitting here, Suzanne. Many of you have met before. The second is our son, Joe. And the third is Elizabeth McCormick. And we have known each other for more than 30 years. One little simple anecdote was that when I was beginning my own nonprofit organization, had no money, no nothing, no whatever, and I met Elizabeth, and at the end of the meeting, she says, "Can I serve on your board?" And I had no sense of the importance of that suggestion. So I said, "Of course." And it's history ever since. Elizabeth has done many, many, many things of importance, and I can't mention them all. And also many things of fun. You'll hear some of them through the conversation that she's going to have with Charlie. But has been chair of the MacArthur Foundation, advisor to the Rockefeller family and its philanthropies, still does some advising to members of the family on the board of Hamilton College. I mean, the Asian Cultural Council, the range of what Elizabeth knows and has done and has provoked in the best of senses is just amazing. So we are really lucky to have Elizabeth with us to have a conversation with Charlie about philanthropy and life and anything else that comes up. Ready to go?
Absolutely.
She
Good.
better be. Yeah. You know, I in some of my research, I'm glad you rattled off some of those names. I organized things according to what Elizabeth has done, and on the plane, I was looking over again some of this material, and Asian Cultural Council, Atlantic Century Association, Filer, Hamilton College, MacArthur, Pop Council, Sloan Kettering, Spelman, Trust for Mutual Understanding, the Whitney, and on and on and on. And it's really a remarkable and possibly unique blend of things. But I'd like to start our conversation back some number of decades ago, because I think that foundation for what was to come later was laid back then. And I'm really interested, Elizabeth, to get you to talk a little bit about going back to February of 1944.
Whoa.
You were 22 years old at the time.
Yes.
And you were a senior at Manhattanville, about to graduate from Manhattanville College. And you were very, very bright young woman, very talented. And maybe you would say today that the world was your oyster, but maybe at that time that wasn't so for a woman. Maybe you can get into that. But at that time, you went to the Order of Sacred Heart and interviewed with the nuns to talk about a possible career as a nun. So here we are, February, the winter of 1944, and you're about to graduate, and you look around the landscape, and you go and you talk to these folks at this order where, if you sign up, your life is very circumscribed. Can you tell us about that?
Well, it's a long time ago. Of course I remember. But it wasn't like suddenly making a decision about a career. It wasn't like that. I had during maybe 3 years, believed that this is what God called me to do. I didn't like the thought, but I decided that's what I was meant to do. And my family, we're a Roman Catholic family. We went to Mass every Sunday, but we weren't overly religious. But when I entered the Society of the Sacred Heart in September of '44, having graduated from college the May before, and I told my family that summer, July of '44, and they were absolutely amazed. So it wasn't something that I talked to them about. It was something I decided, and I did it. Now, I certainly believe that this was what I was called to do, and faced the fact of what it meant I wouldn't do, like marry and have children. I faced that, but it was a calling from God. Fast forward many years later, I believe now that part of the reason was not a spiritual reason. It was that my horizon as a nun would be and proved to be a far broader one than had I married a Catholic, lived in suburbia, and had 5 children. I think now that had something to do with it, but it was not a conscious factor.
So maybe subconsciously it's a career choice that with other options today you don't make, even though
I don't know.
you feel the call. So you enter in 1944, and I think this is right. From then until approximately 1967, you didn't return to your family home. Is that right, or is that?
That's right.
Can you tell us about that?
This is far more interesting to people than philanthropy. this really is a showstopper at dinner parties. No, the order to which I belonged was founded during the French Revolution. It was a very strict order, so the only time you went out of the convent was for health or for education, educational meetings, or for instance, I got a PhD, so I went out to school, but I never went home, never. You weren't allowed to. But then, in I think it was 69, is that the right date, Charlie? There was a general chapter of the order in Rome, and certain people went because of their jobs. I was elected to go, and at that meeting, many of those laws changed. And so that after that, it was because of Vatican II and all kinds of things, I could go home. It still was quite restricted what you could do.
But I want to, before we move along to the post-Vatican II changes, I just want to zero in on one particular incident because it's suggestive of the, so here we are in the modern world in the 1960s, but it suggests the sort of medieval roots, not medieval, but the French Revolution roots of the order. Your father died.
Yeah.
What happened?
And you didn't go home. No, you couldn't go to your own father's funeral. And I remember, you didn't even telephone much. I remember phoning my mother and saying how sorry I wasn't able to go to his funeral. And of course my mother was used to this. This was years later. And she said to me, I don't think you're the one I'm missing at this moment. You don't need to be here. So it was part of a whole thing that's very hard to reconstruct now.
And hard, I think, for us to understand. Joel?
I just wondered, from conversations we've had, this was also a meeting which was conducted all in French, if I remember.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
And you didn't know a word of French.
Not true.
But you learned it. No, that was the point.
I could read French, but before I went to that particular meeting, I took 100 hours of Berlin's French.
This is the Rome post
This
Vatican
was
II
the
meeting.
Rome meeting. And 100 hours, one-on-one French, 10 hours a day. And I, at that time, was on the board of a school called Harlem Prep School. And I was the only white person on the board. And one day there was an evening meeting after my Berlitz 10 hours. Went to the meeting, sat down at the meeting, pretty tired. And during the meeting, someone asked me a question, and I answered in French. Because I'd been doing it for 10 hours a day. And the rest of the people in the room thought, they didn't know what I was talking about. They thought, she has lost her mind. And of course I caught myself and said, that's a class I'm taking.
So in 1973, you're thinking about leaving the order.
Yeah.
And what is it that's caused you to think about leaving?
I was elected and went to that meeting in Rome with French that was adequate but not great. And I was young for the group that was there, which wasn't all that young. And they were the nuns from all over the world, and it would take the rest of the time. But I learned at that meeting that the order didn't really know what it was doing. This was the cream of the crop, the major superiors from all over the world, and then some of us who were elected. And one of the things which I can say in 2 sentences, the Mother General had been elected for life, and she was psychotic. So we had to remove her, and I, who was the youngest person there, had to orchestrate that. Okay? Because these were people who believed but didn't know the real world. Incidentally, from the time I was very young, as a nun, lived the life we've talked about, but I also had real world jobs. I taught, I was the headmistress of a school, I was a dean and a faculty member at Manhattanville, and I was president. So I had a real world experience, which made leaving much easier. It wasn't, I'm just reading Karen Armstrong's book, The Spiral Staircase, which describes her life after 7 years as a nun, where she had great trouble adjusting to the real world. I was in it, kind of, with one part of my life, so I didn't find it hard.
So in 1974, you leave the order, and you go, perfectly reasonable transition, you go from living a life where you take a vow of poverty to immediately going to work for the wealthiest family in the history of the planet.
Why not? It doesn't make you wealthy to work for the wealthiest family.
You were hired by the Rockefellers to essentially advise the Cousins generation and to establish a philanthropic office. Can you tell us about those 2 challenges?
Well, I worked in the Rockefeller family office. While I was still at Manhattanville College, I had been invited to go to look at a college which had asked Jay Rockefeller if he wanted to be president. And Jay did what the family does still. got people to advise him. So 3 of us went and spent time in this college. I had done a lot of evaluating colleges with the middle states, so I knew how to do it. We then met with Jay, and I learned that when you meet with people whom you consider are important, you don't like to tell them what you really think. Okay. So the 2 men on the one hand and on the other. When it came to my turn, I said, you know, that's not a very good college. It's really not good enough for you. Secondly, you know nothing about running a college, so you're really not good enough for it. I learned subsequently that's not the way you talk. And so when I announced that I was leaving Manhattanville College, the Rockefellers offered me the job. That's the story.
Because of your diplomatic skills. But your advice was...
So I then, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, a foundation, there were a group of people who worked there who were on a split payroll. They were paid by the foundation and by the family. They gave the family philanthropic advice. The lawyers for the Rockefeller family decided they might be getting more than they were paying for. So there should be a philanthropic office simply to advise the family on their personal philanthropy and the gifts from their charitable trusts. And I worked at Rockefeller Brothers Fund for 2 years to get to know the family, and then in '76 set up the office.
And a major role that you had was advising the cousins generation, the current generation, which is aged from like about 73 or so to 50 or something like that.
Yeah, they've grown up.
Yeah,
Young.
they were young, and now they're less so. But the cousins are the sons of the brothers.
Sons and daughters.
So what sort of things would you advise them on?
This was before computers, and every member of the family had what was called a blue book, and it had in it every philanthropy they'd given to over a 3-year period.
As individuals?
Individuals. And so I got all those books, and as I met with each family member, I said, you know, as I understand it, these are your interests. And almost every one of them said, that's not my interest. And I said, then your giving is all wrong. Because I've come up with what your interests are by studying what you give to. So we had a plan, which was each one of them would decide how much money to allocate every year to respond to requests from their friends. Certain amount of money. Didn't have to be their interest, but friends asked for it. And then the rest would be devoted to what they were interested in, and we tried over the years to narrow their interests so that with relatively little money, because they weren't as rich as their parents, they could have some kind of impact in what they were doing.
So when you started there, your knowledge of philanthropy was pretty limited. But one thing you said to me a while back that really stuck in my head, based on your experience, was you said to give money away very well is not easy. It's difficult. Can you expand upon that for us, please?
Yeah, it is difficult. People say it's harder to give it away than it is to raise it. That's baloney. It's just not true. It's much harder to raise money But to give away money well is difficult because you have to be selective, you have to know what you're doing, you have to know that with this amount of money, it's going to make some kind of a difference. You have to know a lot of things. And therefore, it's not easy. And this is individuals. Equally difficult for foundations. It's very hard.
Why were the Rockefellers good at it?
Why?
What made them good at it?
The Rockefellers were taught philanthropy their whole lives. When people look back on the Rockefeller family, they're going to think of them as philanthropic, and they're going to look at the institutions that they created. Rockefeller University, the Museum of Modern Art, Colonial Williamsburg, you can list them. Now, a younger generation haven't that kind of money. They can't establish institutions. They can support institutions, which is, in my opinion, a good thing. But they have to, one of the things that I found when I got to know them, the interests that cut across the family, the cousins generation, was the environment. Talking about the 70s and the 80s. So I identified a few institutions, NRDC, Natural Resources Defense Council, was just beginning, and it had very good leadership. So in advising them, I advised them to give to 2 or 3 institutions, so that when you added together what they gave, it made some kind of a difference.
You advised them to give to NRDC in part because they had very good leadership, which leads me to another thing you told me, which I think is really interesting, that you said that the only way you can give money is to people. There's no other way. You can not give money to an institution. You give it to the person running it. Can you get a little deeper into that, please?
Yeah. You know, these are just my beliefs. I haven't written a book. I think you can't give money to a platonic form, to an idea. You give it obviously to an institution, but you really give it to an individual. And therefore, you have to identify. And I think that is more of a role for a philanthropic staff person than anything else. Who is running this, and how good are they at it? And are they so good that they're going to get the right person after them? So you give money to individuals. That leads me to another point. Strategic philanthropy is what this is all about. A foundation with a very clear strategy. And coming here, I looked up that word. It's war stuff. It's war. It's strategy to win a war. And now it's used strategic philanthropy. But with a war, you hope to win as fast as possible. The strategy in giving away money has to be far more long-term, because it isn't a question of, although many foundations do this, well, our strategy is, and we're going to do it for 6 years. No good. It's not long enough. So, what I think about giving to individuals, which is what Charlie asked me, I think if you choose the best people in whatever field you're giving away your money, you have to find the best people. And there's a good chance that their strategy will not be the foundation strategy. And it probably is better than the foundation strategy because they're doing it. And we in philanthropy are just in another world.
It's really interesting you said that, because you said not long ago to me, the danger of nonprofits is that they try to tell you, if you are the foundation, what they think you want to hear.
Yeah,
And they'll alter what
They're stupid if they don't do that.
but you say they'll alter what they're doing to make it fit what you are giving money to, and this is terrible because they know better about.
Yeah, well, in the best-led nonprofits, they will tell you what they're doing in a way that they hope fits your strategy. But if they're good at what they're doing, they're not going to change what they're doing in order to get your money. And I think that probably the most important thing for anyone with any role in giving away money is to learn how to get from people the truth. And that's not easy, because it's a powerless relationship. And the person without power wants to win over the person, me, with the possibility of giving the money. So to get truth is very difficult. We're supposed not to talk too long. We okay?
Yeah, we're fine. Yeah, we're fine.
I remember I was involved with a trust, and the woman who will establish died of diabetes. So we established a program funding young diabetes researchers in 5 medical schools over a period of years. And at one point, I went to a meeting of deans of medical schools and had a meeting with the 5 deans of the schools we were giving to. And one of the deans said to me, if the researcher who you're funding changes his area of interest from diabetes to cancer, will the money stop? And I said, repeat that question. Which he did. I said, what do you think we are? Who do you think we are? That researcher may be on the way to a cure for cancer. Of course we're not going to stop the money. The only reason we're giving it for diabetes is because that's what Marilyn Simpson died of, okay? If it changes, that's fine, maybe better. I have learned since that it was not a stupid question, because a lot of foundations and individuals would stop giving because of that change. Scary.
What if the change, when you think back broadly to when you started with the Rockefellers, what are the sort of trends and changes in philanthropy that you see, that you like on the one hand, and that you maybe particularly don't like on the other?
Well,
measurement being one, if you could address that.
Well, I thought I only quote on that subject. But I think philanthropy, by and large, is getting more professional, and that's good. Problem, and this is not just foundations, it's individuals who are more sophisticated. They no longer want to give for general support. And anyone who's run anything knows it's the most valuable money anyone can give. But people, foundations, don't want to do it. And they don't do it because it really means losing control. To go back what I said about you give money to individuals, if you can't count on the head of the nonprofit to use it well, shouldn't give him any money. But if he'll use it or she'll use it well, unrestricted money is the most valuable money. So when I ran that office, I used to say, be innovative, give unrestricted funds. And we managed it a lot. But the tendency is to give it for a program, limited, and then stop after 3 years. And the program was only started, it's good, etc., because you gave them money, and then you leave, and they have to fund it out of someone else's unrestricted money, or it goes out of business. So I think one thing that's a trend is more giving that's program rather than general support. The other thing is, I think we've all gone mad on evaluation. And we make people spend so much money looking at what they're doing and writing us about it much more than it's worth. And I believe the danger there is that foundations will begin only funding what can be measured because they've gone mad on measurement. And I think it happens to all of us because we like to feel good. I remember many years ago when I was at Manhattanville, going to the Kennedy Foundation with the chairman of Manhattanville's board, and the chairman was Peter McCullough, who then was the chairman of Xerox. And Eunice Shriver said, would you give us proof that the liberal education that you're offering really is whatever? Tell us what effect it has. Peter McCullough said, I'm chairman of Xerox. Every Friday, I get a number for the number of Xerox pages that was sold that week. I know how many million anywhere in the world, and that's measurable. But what happens from a liberal education is cannot be measured. And you know a little more about it 25 years later. And that's this quotation, because people don't believe what I just said. This is Einstein, and this is hanging in his office in Princeton. Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. And I think what we can count, we want to give an education to this number of children in a poor neighborhood, and only 200 were in our classes last year, and this year there are 300. You can count that. Go ahead, count it. But what happens, say you have 100 this year and only 50 next year, but the 50 get a better education. So that's just my real hang-up.
So as you look ahead over the horizon, what do you see happening what trends do you see sort of developing in the years to come?
I'm going to be dead.
No.
Is that countable or measurable? Or?
It sure is measurable. It will be true in less than 20 years, that's for sure.
I don't believe that.
I don't know. I honestly don't know. But I think...
What would you like to see happen?
I don't go to the Council on Foundations. I went once. I just can't bear it.
Why can't you bear it?
It's all talk, like I'm doing now. Talk. But I think if I don't know who believes what I believe about measurement, about strategy that isn't too rigid. You have to have a strategy which is a plan. You have to have one. But if it's so rigid that when a potential grantee who's very good has another strategy, I think if enough people see this, it'll change. I can't believe that we're going to continue this program giving that we now do. I don't know.
So I have a couple of other quick questions before we open it up to broader discussion, and one is around the issue of women in philanthropy. And when you first started in philanthropy, there really weren't that many women in philanthropy, certainly not very many women in positions of real clout. How much has that changed?
I think it's changed a lot. I think gradually, I don't believe in hiring simply to hire a woman. I don't think, or a minority, or any other category. I think that you hire the best you can find. And I think if you go about that without prejudice, you'll find good women. In every search, will you? No. And it shouldn't, it really, it's discriminatory to say, now we've never had a woman. Gotta have a woman. I don't believe in that. We've got to have an open search, and we'll offer the job. I remember I was on the search committee for Hamilton College, and we never had a woman president, and we were having trouble with the search. It was slow. And the chairman of the committee said, we can't fail. We said the deadline was February. And I said there's only one way to fail. It has nothing to do with a deadline. It means getting the right person. And missing a deadline, what difference does it make? And I said, we have to find someone, I didn't say woman, who when we interview, we say, wow, that's the right person. And a woman came, and when she left after the interview, the group, mostly men, said, Elizabeth, wow, you hire her. Okay? So I think there are more women presidents of places now. Princeton has a woman. Brown has a woman.
Duke used to have a woman.
Harvard has a woman.
One last question before we open it up, and this is just something that you said to me a while back that I think is really interesting, and I wanted to just get you to expand on it a little bit. You said, people born to money don't understand money. They either are overly generous, or just a little bit of money is too much to them. They don't get it. So could you just talk a little bit about that?
I don't think being born with money is a real advantage. It has advantages to it, but I think when you've never had to think about money. And I can remember saying to my late husband, if I had a magic wand, anyone who's been born into money, and I had power, I would wave the wand so that after that person graduated from last degree, college, law school, whatever, they would have to work for 10 years in order to have meals and a roof over their head. Because that's impossible. They don't understand money. It's been too much a part of their lives. And therefore they tend either to be overly generous or the opposite. Not all of them, but many of them. It's very bad to have someone who you've talked to before quote to you what you said. But I think I agree with what I said.
Excellent. Some of it, anyway.
All right, Charles, thank you. Elizabeth, thank you. We're going to open it up for questions. I did not do what I usually do to start, which is go around the room and have people say who they are and where they're from. So, before you ask your question, just say I'm, Ed Skluton, I'm from Duke or whatever, so that Elizabeth and Charlie will know who and
then
who
there's
you're-
a test to see if we know them.
if we know them all. Kristen.
Thank you very much. I'm Kristen Goss. I'm on the faculty here, and I used to be a reporter of the Chronicle of Philanthropy. So, I was as a woman who's had a few changes of career, I was really interested in the career path that you pursued. It's really, really interesting in your initial comments about sort of being a nun, actually potentially representing more opportunities for you to engage in public life than perhaps a lot of women of that generation pursued a more traditional path. I always think of nuns as being great charitable institution builders, and I wonder if your experience in the order, running charitable institutions, Catholic organizations, and so forth, how that might have informed your thinking when you went to the other side, to the grant giving side.
Well, interesting thing, I believe. As I said in the other context, the Vatican II changed the lives of nuns. It made them much less different. You lived a much more normal life. I think it was the beginning of the end as far as nuns went. The only orders of nuns that still get many recruits are the very cloistered nuns, like the Carmelites. The others, it's too much like not being a nun. Obedience, you're told you can do pretty much whatever you feel called to do. Poverty, you write a budget. Chastity still is the one thing that remains. Now, I do believe that not having more nuns in education, in healthcare, where they did an excellent job, is a real loss. Because that was what they did, and they did not have the obligations of a family. So they did it all the time, wholeheartedly. I used to go, when we were allowed to, as the president of Manhattanville, to visit alumni groups all over the country. And when they asked about faculty, they always asked about the nuns, although the nuns were never even half the faculty. But they were the available ones. They were the ones who took your, I don't know. So I think they were a model, and I think it's a real loss that they're not around anymore.
Okay.
Well, we wowed them. They don't have a question.
I'm not taking a fall on this.
No
This is
question?
worse. There we go. Peter? Kristen will come back. Peter?
Or did you want to follow up, Kristen?
If you don't mind,
Yeah, go ahead.
the other half of the question, which I'd love to hear your thoughts on, were, when you were working on the nonprofit side as a nun and coming into contact with nuns that were running nonprofits, hospitals, and charities,
Right.
and so forth, did that experience on the grant receiving or the donation receiving end inform how you went about strategizing
Yeah.
on the grant giving side?
Yeah. I think that having been on the nonprofit side is a great advantage when you find yourself in a position to have something to do with giving away other people's money. I think it's a great advantage. I also think that everyone who has a role in being philanthropic by giving money should at the same time have a role in a nonprofit where they have to raise money. And I have found, as a few of you know, have become very interested in palliative care. and I've created an institution called the Partnership for Palliative Care. And so I'm suddenly raising money. Not for Hamilton College, where I can go to graduates of the college, but for a new organization. And I've learned most people don't know what palliative care is. So they have to learn what it is not hospice. Although I hope you get good palliative care in hospice. But what has been fascinating, the way I am treated by colleagues in philanthropy, not all of them, but many of them, when I go to them looking for money, instead of discussing with them how to give it away, you have immediately a different relationship. And they say, well, could I see your strategic plan? I want to kill them.
Without palliative care.
Of course I've got a strategic plan. Of course we have one. But it's an attitude of all knowledge, all power. And I think all of us, and I'm not joking now, have to be very careful how we behave when we're in a position to give away money. We have to be very careful.
Elizabeth, let me just ask you to tell a story that I heard you tell at the only time you were at the Counseling Foundation.
Yes. No, that was Independence Center.
Oh, it was Independence.
So much for your memories.
I think it was.
That's why that's the love of my life.
What did I say?
You were talking about being chairman of MacArthur and going to with a group that you were working closely with to raise money for them, and you had an appointment that was set up, and I think, finish it, but you told it in a remarkable way, and how they treated you. And
It was Ford, actually.
Ford.
The one I remember. No, someone I was helping raise money. This was Cambridge College.
Right.
And I had made, the president had said to me, will you come with me to Ford? And she had the date. I said, I can't do it that day. She said, please, I need you there. I said, okay. So I changed my calendar, and we went. And the person we were to see wasn't there. She went to another appointment. Did she phone before? No. So we saw someone who couldn't possibly have been helpful. Now, did we say, this is bad treatment? Of course not. Because if we'd said that, the one little hope we had of getting some money, we wouldn't have gotten. Is that the story you remember?
That's the story. So you, as chair of MacArthur, having to take this from an assistant program officer who knew nothing about the field, and you both were just stunned and walked out.
Yeah. But that doesn't always happen.
No. Thank goodness. Joel, do you have a question?
I'm still thinking.
Okay.
I'm having
Peter?
so much fun listening. Really wonderful.
This is remarkable that you've held up so far. That's great.
She told me before I came in, don't say anything.
Peter?
Well, my name is Peter Garrett. I'm a first year MPP's Master's of Public Policy student. I'm in Ed's class. My concern is going to be very much more parochial. As someone who did an honors thesis in philosophy at Notre Dame, I can't help but notice that they skipped the most important part of your bio, which is getting a PhD in philosophy. Do you think that, honestly, just listening to you and your sort of crisp wit and sort of pithy and very, very sharp thinking, I can't help but think that your training in philosophy has informed what you are doing. So I just was curious if you would reflect on that a little bit.
My BA was in English literature major, and then I got the PhD in philosophy at Fordham University. And it was it trains your mind. And when you're talking about education, it really isn't what you learn. It's how you learn to think, how your critical judgment is developed. And I learned a lot by doing a PhD in philosophy. It's not practical, but from another point of view, it's very practical, because you really learn how to think. There was a wonderful professor at Fordham University. His last name was Pollock. He was a brilliant man who wrote very little. But I took every course he gave. He was an amazing man. And he never gave you back the papers you wrote, ever. He gave you a grade. He let you know what the grade was. And then when I finished the comprehensives and the whole thing, he phoned me. And he said, I just reread all your papers. You think like the British philosopher F.H. Bradley, who wrote Appearance and Reality, his greatest book. You will find doing a dissertation on Bradley easy. I suggest you do it. So I did. And Bradley had worked at Merton College, Oxford, and his library was still there. It isn't anymore. But it was a little library with all his philosophy books in it, all of them annotated. And so I was working. I was a dean at Manhattanville. And so I went 2 summers and worked in that library and wrote the dissertation on Bradley. And a funny story. I was the only one in this library until a young guy came to work there. We were together in a room like a fourth of the size of this room. Never a word. But every day he'd come in and he'd take off his coat. And it was cold because the buildings weren't well heated and it was cold. Off the coat. And remember, I not only was a nun, but I looked like a nun. Habit and everything. Not a word. One day, after weeks of sitting there, he got up and put his coat back on. And I said, thank God you're human. And we became good friends after that. And that's funny, that's my memory rather than what I wrote in the dissertation. But are you doing philosophy here?
No, I'm doing public policy.
That's right.
I did Notre Dame undergrad and did a bachelor's of philosophy.
You know, it's interesting. Manhattanville College was then a Catholic college, but it was a very open place. The faculty were not all Catholic. There was it wasn't rigorous at all. But I went, before to Fordham, I went to Providence College, which was a Dominican college in Providence, Rhode Island, which was extremely doctrinaire. And it was St. Thomas Aquinas as if it was contemporary. I mean, everything in it. You got your MA there by some kind of a paper, but primarily an oral examination. And I had an oral examination. And the president of the place, I even remember his name, Father Slavin, came in during my oral. Therefore, it was also a test for the priests who were questioning 4 or 5 priests. So they asked me all the hard questions like predestination and all this question. So for 3 of them, I answered by saying, I have been taught at Providence College. And then I answered the question. At the end of the session, the president called me over. And he said, Sister, you preface some of your remarks with "you have been taught." Does that mean you don't believe what you said? I said, "That's right." I don't. And he said, "You're honest, but you're wrong."
And you got the MA.
Of course.
You got, great. Yes, please. No, you. Yeah.
I'm really interested in pursuing your identifying leadership as a criteria for investing foundation funds. That sounds like a very thoughtful and appropriate way forward. I'm interested then in how you went about this, and probably more problematic, since people leave, and in some areas the turnover is fairly high. How do you assess the succession planning?
Yeah, it's not easy. I think, and I've judged incorrectly often, very few people get a top job without having had some management experience. If they've been chairman of a department in a university before they become a dean. But there's something you can look at, and I think you have to. And one of the things that I think you do, you talk to people who help them to be honest, people who work for them. Because I think you can get a better line on the ability of a person from the people beneath them rather than the people above them. Although, of course, you talk to the people for whom they work. And I think the hardest thing to discern, and in my opinion, maybe the most important, in a person who's going to be the head and have people reporting to them, is personal emotional security. If you're insecure, and this doesn't show up easily, you're not a good person to work for. Because people, first of all, a person who's emotionally insecure will not do what I said to the head of Ford, will not hire people better in their areas than the head is. That's too scary. They won't do it. And how do you find that out? I hired somebody once, she shall be nameless at the institution, and she had all the credentials and had done very well, not in a top job, and she was no good. And I learned that she, when she'd have meetings with her vice presidents, 4 of them, every second week, they had to tell her before the meeting what they were going to bring up at the meeting. Now that's big insecurity. You're afraid of the people who report to you. So how do you do it? I think you have to have practice. And I chose that woman. I wasn't the only one. But she was no good for that reason. So it's not easy.
Can I just follow, though, press you on the succession issue? Because if you follow your recommendation that of investing in an institution longer than 3 years,
Right.
and in many of those places you will see a turnover of the leadership during that period. What other factors beyond that individual are you looking for that will provide some degree of confidence?
Well, I was talking to one of you before. I think probably the greatest weakness in nonprofit boards are boards of trustees. They're not very good for the most part, and they're bad in one of 2 ways. Either they do nothing or they try to manage. board can't manage anything. I think their hardest job and their most important job is hiring and, if need be, replacing the CEO. And therefore, it's very chancy. And you're right, there can be a change. And you're in the middle of funding, and you can't withdraw funding. You shouldn't. But it's hard because leadership does change. But the institution that has a good leader chosen by a pretty good board is apt to get another good leader because they get to know what they're like, and they're not the same for every institution.
Bob Connor, for a while president of the Teagle Foundation until last December. Could you expand a little bit on the other side of that equation? I'm interested in the selection of the board members on foundations. And I'm not thinking primarily of family foundations, where there are obvious constraints on it, but drawing more on your experience with MacArthur and many other foundations. What makes that selection process work, and what makes it sometimes rather dismally fail?
A lot of ways to fail. But I think having as the major aim being diversity. And that happens now. We've got to have a diverse board. Again, you want a diverse board. If you have a good board, it's apt to stay good. But if you have one that isn't good, you've got to get a few good people with the courage to lead and to get rid of people who aren't good. It's not easy. And often there are reasons that it's not just a family, but a corporate board that becomes independent from the corporation still has remnants of that. And that can be very, I don't know how you do it. How do you do it? How do you get a good board? You've got me. We
Well,
had a
you-
good
you-
time.
Early, it was the other way around. Actually, wasn't she got you?
I'm now helping her with the palliative care activity, but
Yes.
how do you get a good board? Well, maybe we need another whole session.
No.
I really think it's important that good boards, this is my sense of things, good boards will do their best to choose good boards. There's a culture of every board, and Joel, I'd love you to say something as well. There is a culture of every board that I've ever seen, frequently dysfunctional but held together because we have to do the job. And then you occasionally run into a board that is fabulous. They know what they want. They have great engagement skills with the CEO, and the CEO has great engagement skills with them. And they see the world and what they're doing as a journey and a process to go somewhere. How do you get a good board? You really try to find out, to me, values, ethics, knowledge of the field, and willingness to call a spade a spade. Those are some characteristics, I think, and you always did. I mean, you folks have just heard a little bit of Elizabeth. If she don't think something's going right, somehow you find out. Joel?
Pretty easily.
Yeah. Joel?
Question, right?
There's a question.
Behind me? Okay, let's do this.
Yeah.
I don't want to, that's a pretty important topic.
Well, I just simply add that then you're really next. It seems to me that that what's been said about the boards, the quality of the boards, is that is a good part of the story. I mean, I think about, for example, the really interesting examples that I know about are where you started up an organization and you put in place the procedures
that will guarantee reaching very widely out to identify talent and setting standards at the very beginning. The one that leaps to mind is the Center for Effective Philanthropy Board. It's an extraordinary board. Everybody on there really is high quality, and everybody who's brought on is high quality because of the fact that the people who are on there already are high quality. And they work very carefully together. I have to tell you that it is one would be tempted to say that it's over organized. I mean, I was chairman of the audit committee for that thing, and it was just I seem to get that job sometimes. I really don't like it, but you do it because they ask you to do it, and because but every function was attended to. There was a good nominating and governance committee that really did look at the group and say, we only want the best. We're not going to take anybody that's not the best. We're not going to put somebody on that says, well, I'll join the board, but I'm not coming to meetings. That was out from the very beginning. And they made it clear that there's an obligation to this organization, and everybody who comes on has got to carry his or her share of the burden. And the standards were high. I've been on other boards, which are as some of the, as you referred to, as others have referred to here, where the culture, there's not a unified culture. There are a couple of people who are really running things, and everybody else just sits back and says, well, you run it, it's fine. I'm happy to be on the board, I'll help wherever I can, but I'm not really part of the effort. And I've been in the middle of boards where we've transformed them from one kind of board to the other. And it's hard to transform a board that has a culture like that. Right. But if you really want to make it work, you got to do it. But Elizabeth's absolutely correct. The biggest single flaw in nonprofit organizations is the quality of the board. And I have to say, I think the boards of foundations are worst of all.
Well, because they don't have to do anything.
They don't have to do anything. They don't have to raise money. They don't have to be accountable to anybody. Same thing. Go ahead.
I'm Tom Darden. I'm with a company that does environmental cleanup work called Cherokee. My question was more philosophical. Why do you think people are philanthropic? And what are you seeing in terms of that as a trend? And what are you seeing in terms of that regionally, internationally as a trend?
Is that all?
I have some follow-up.
Anyone who can answer that. What was the first part of
Why
it?
do people give money away?
Why do people give money away? I think that's as different of the people you're talking to. I think that people who've just made a lot of money in today's high technology world tend to want to have control come with their money. And they may be great at making money, but that doesn't mean that they know how to run the nonprofit. What I always say is a nonprofit has to be business-like, but it's not a business. And if you bring that to it, it's not good. People give money for all kinds of reasons. You feel good when you give away money. They often give because it feels good. They often give because there's something in their lives. For instance, I was on the board of Memorial, and people who they or their family had a good experience in that hospital are grateful.
Memorial Sloan Kettering.
Memorial Sloan Kettering. They gave a lot of money out of gratitude. I think there are as many motives as there are people. And you have to get to know a person, and then you get to know why they give. But I think if people want to have control come with their money should be turned down because they don't know how to run a nonprofit. And places like, the environment, NRDC, well, that's a success story because they have a very big board now and they do much more than they did 30 years ago, but it's very well done. And people like to be on that board, and the management manages. They don't. So, who's that picture over there?
That picture there, that's the picture of the name of the couple for whom this room is named. He was a Duke alumnus, a doctor, double Duke alumnus by Barney Rhodes. He planted what many people would say was the first great vineyard in California, known by its name, called Martha's Vineyard, and so that's who that is.
I thought of you, Joel. It's good wine up there.
Well, that's precisely. Why do you think?
Another reason for giving.
Tom, did you have another question?
No, I guess, how does that answer, so that's why people give, how does that relate to regional differences in giving? So why don't those factors affect people equally everywhere?
Because in many places, many countries, there is not a tradition of philanthropy. And in many rich families, there's not a tradition. So in a region or a country where the tradition does not exist, it's very hard. And therefore, it's a challenge to some group of people to take a leadership role. I know that Atlantic is trying to do that in Ireland, for instance, but it's not easy. Also, we have in this country a good tax incentive to give. In many countries, that's not a region of this country, but I don't know regions except the one I'm in. But it's a tradition of giving, and you have to get it going is not easy.
Can I add a footnote to Elizabeth's answer? I do think that people give for lots of different reasons, but I also think, taking your question about how wide geographic differences, regional differences make a difference, because there's a different culture, and people give within the context of the culture they're in. But Elizabeth's point is that you can, in fact, create a culture. It's just harder. But the fact is that you look around the country, and there are. What's his name from Princeton made a career really out of studying geographical differences in metropolitan areas and giving. Sorry, no, it was not what now. It was Foley. Sorry, Julian Wolpert, with whom Paul studied, has written countless articles doing empirical studies on regional differences in volunteering and in giving. And in the United States, where the culture generally is very supportive of charitable giving, it varies quite widely in terms of the participation. And that has a lot to do with the religious backgrounds of those regions. It has a lot to do with the kind of cultures that are there in terms of the way in which people come about things. North Carolina, of course, has one of the best of all, right, Tom?
The culture.
Best of culture. In any event, that's how I would just simply add that as a thought.
And just to add to that, I have a paper that was written. I think most people in the room know that in terms of the sum total of giving and the proportionality of giving, the South generally gives the least and has the fewest large foundations and so forth. And if you want to get hold of me, or anybody who wants, it's a wonderfully helpful piece of cultural and social history that explains why the South has become, or over time, has not been in any way, and still does not appear to be becoming a strong philanthropic region.
And my regional comment really was international. I was thinking internationally
Sure.
and thinking, how do you deal with such a shift in wealth to countries that don't have traditions of philanthropy? And it seems like an important philanthropic objection. Someone should start a philanthropy to motivate philanthropy in places where there are not traditions of philanthropy. And that's a lot of the world. China.
Absolutely.
There's none. I know I'm on the board of the Juilliard School, and we have, at this moment, there are 80 million children in China studying music. 80 million. And we'd like to have some of the best of them at Juilliard, but to raise money in China is very difficult. So, who started? Was it John Paul Getty? He wasn't a big giver. Is that true?
I don't know.
No, he wasn't. He just left the money to the museum.
But anyway, John D. Rockefeller III was behind Lincoln Center, and he helped get it going. The new Lincoln Center, which is old now. And he went out to see John Paul Getty to get him to give to the new Lincoln Center. And he went and he had a meeting with him. And Getty said, I'm not interested. I do not give money away. JDR III said, but, and told him, no, I'm not interested. And JDR III said, could I use your telephone? I have to phone. I thought I'd be here longer. I have to get my car. And Getty said to him, on the first floor of this building, there's a payphone. So he didn't even get a telephone.
Who says you can't take it with you? We'll have two more questions. Anthony, how about it?
I'm Anthony So, and I teach global health here at San Francisco. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your approach to advising on philanthropists on how they achieve legacy. And some of the sort of strategic decisions, particularly on whether or not they go for something like a brick and mortar institution that they can name and affix their name to, as opposed to an idea or a theory of change to which they may have really an anonymous contribution really to historically, or only if someone digs up the information on it, or their strategy as to whether or not they should be enabling others, or whether or not they might be imposing their single vision on it through a multitude of grants, or simply by the weight of their particular donation to a single institution. And I wonder what's different between those who are born to wealth versus those who have earned their own wealth. And in that context, if you would comment on some of the living donors today, like Bill and Melinda Gates, compared to, say, the Hewitt Foundation family, or say, even Warren Buffett. I'm just curious, they seem to have taken quite different paths to achieving legacy, and I'm just curious what your observations might be.
Well, on the question of legacy, if I was sitting and talking to people who were thinking about wanting it, what you said is true. The easiest thing is to get your name on the building, because it'll be there. But my real answer to that is, I would say to any of these people, let other people, 25, 50 years from now, decide what your legacy is. Because if you think you're going to decide it, first of all, you have to be wrong, because that isn't what you're going to be remembered for. And you know, you're going to be dead. What difference does it make to you? Let somebody else decide. But the reason that there are buildings with names, some people really need that. And I mean, the Ford Foundation, people might say, there's Ford's legacy. Anyone who knew him say he wouldn't like at all what Ford has always done. He wouldn't want the Ford Foundation as his legacy. So I think buildings are the best way. But what will Bill and Melinda Gates be known for? Is it vaccines? What is it going to be?
Too soon to tell.
Hmm?
Too soon to tell.
It's much too soon. It's much too soon. But I don't think, just as I said before, for a foundation to decide what to give to, because it's measurable, is a huge mistake. So to decide what to do because you want a legacy, it's probably not what you're going to get. Anyway, and as I said, I mean, it's no joke. It's true. They'll be dead. What difference does it make? But if they leave something that's important, whether their name is on... John D. Rockefeller III, they don't want their names on things. But Lawrence Rockefeller was extremely generous to Memorial Sloan Kettering. He would not have his name on things. So at one of his last birthdays, he died in his early 90s, a group of us raised money, not much money, maybe $100,000, to name the boardroom in a new building there, the LSR boardroom. And we were sworn to secrecy. Because if he had heard about it, he would have said, no, I don't want it. But at a given board meeting, when he was a life trustee and always came, the chairman said, you know, Lawrence, this room has your name on it. From now on, we've all done it. He was delighted. Delighted. But he would have forbidden it if we'd asked. You see. So.
What a story. Barbara.
I'm Barbara Goodman, director of the A.J. Fletcher Foundation. And I want to ask you, I'm changing a little bit about what we're talking about, but I'm thinking in the future. To me, the nonprofit world has to change. It has to change how it raises money, and I'm getting to social networking. Most nonprofits, unless they're way out there or big enough, have neither the skills, technology, and it's got to be, I believe it's got to be driven by foundations in some way. But that's kind of, and I believe in that myself, and our foundation works on that. But it's kind of scary in some ways, because we're leading into this century. It's definitely how business is done, and the nonprofits that are going to make it are going to, I believe, have to go that way because that's how young people get their information. So I don't know. How do you've done this a long time? How do you respond to the?
So, say it again. The nonprofits have to do certain things to survive.
Social network.
Social network.
Oh yeah.
The internet, the Facebook, the blogging, Google Wave, they don't have to do it all. They've got to do something, but they're not equipped. They're not connected to one another with their same missions. And I think that's a problem. But maybe I'm wrong.
No,
it's not a problem.
It's a huge problem.
So what are we going to do?
Well, you have to, first of all, you have to get a hold of it. You can't do it from outside just with money. It won't work. Therefore, you've got to find within the nonprofit somebody, and yet it's not easy to find, particularly with older board members. They don't know what you're talking about. And executive directors, depend. You have to find someone who sees this, and then you've got to help them, probably with money, at least to meet and talk about it in an informed way, with someone there who understands it better than, and it's a gradual, you can't impose it. But if it doesn't happen, there's no future.
Elizabeth, sorry today. There's another Elizabeth in this room that I met today, and I was on my bandwagon preaching about this.
This is extremely important, and I believe in what I'm saying when I meet liberal arts college people. Try to think about this college, whatever one I'm talking about, what it's going to be like in 20 years. And it's not going to be just the way it is now. And it's going to be transformed by technology. And if the stronger the institution, the harder it is for them to see what I'm talking about. And I hardly know what I'm talking about. I really don't. But I know that there has to be, for instance, there's going to be no language courses. There'll be history and literature. But language is going to be better taught by computers. And to say that to a faculty, they think you're crazy. But there are going to be major changes. And how do you do it, and how do you get? You do not get it from without. Money won't do it. But some people on a faculties don't like to change. Nobody likes to change. But who's going to get? First of all, the students 20 years from now are going to be a very different mix.
20 years from now,
The demography in this country is changing.
It's a big problem. Joel, are y'all working on this? I mean, it's working.
Well, yes,
It's
actually-
big enough to work on this.
Actually, Ed and two colleagues wrote a very good paper
Coming out in a couple of weeks.
on philanthropy and technology, but it's starting to happen. And if you look at today's issue of the Chronicle of Philanthropy, the announcement was made by the co-founder of Facebook that he's creating an organization in the social media network, which is designed to work with individuals, donors, individuals who want to find places to give money, people who want to work for organizations, but bringing the tools of social networking that as developed by Facebook and others into the article was pretty extensive about the kinds of things he wanted to do. So I mean, I think it's there, and it's something that everybody's facing, but nobody's solved the problem. Nobody's going to solve the problem. It's going to solve itself. Yes.
There's an urgent question.
Yeah, you broke the a natural fatherly instinct, which is 20 years from now, when I have to put 3 kids through college, I wonder if I can even afford to send them to school. And I've thought of this often, and I'm glad I'm a part of a forum where I can actually say it out loud without sounding foolish. But 20 years from now, I wouldn't be surprised if market forces using technology find a way to make the cost of college affordable and of value, especially to students who are intellectually curious. And so I appreciate what you're saying. Not that I want my kids to be exposed to the world just through technology, but I agree with you. I see dramatic changes coming, and I think established institutions like this one and others either better get ahead or going to be caught behind.
But what if much more is done with technology? Because the reason that college is so expensive is it's so people intensive. And it's got to be. And you see, imagine talking about this. There must be some faculty in this room. But you're going to need many fewer faculty because so much of it's going to be done through technology. And then faculty will be doing what only faculty human beings can do, which the computer can't do. But the transition from now to go to I don't know what it costs to come here, but most private liberal arts colleges cost $50,000. Well, now, how many families can afford that? We talk too much.
No, and I'm gonna take the privilege of raising just one more question. It builds on a few things that we've been edging toward, and I think you have some thoughts about it. And that's the question of advocacy. I know this is going to be the last question, but mine will be. Many foundations don't want to, don't know how to. A few do and make it their point to. But I'm wondering in the times that you've seen this possibility go, how do you stand on whether foundations should or should not be advocates about causes and the work they do?
Okay, what is advocacy for? Advocacy is to change public policy. That's what it is. And if you don't change public policy, the changes you make are very ephemeral. Therefore, I think advocacy is appropriate, provided it's always thought of as a means, not an end. And there are some issues where advocacy is particularly important. What I used to say because individuals are becoming more and more interested in giving to change public policy, which is another word for advocacy. Okay? Advocacy is giving money to change public policy. Okay. I used to say, and I still say to the few people that I advise on giving away money, if you want to give money in New York City for help for the homeless, okay, and you think the best way to do that is to get some changes at City Hall on the way homeless are cared for in New York City. My answer is do both. Because if your giving is totally advocacy, it's going to take a long time, and people will die on the streets. Therefore, do both. Try to change policy, but at the same time have what some philanthropists look down on as humanitarian aid. It's extremely important, humanitarian aid. The problem is it's so big that nobody can really get the homeless off the streets in New York with a little money. But I have no problem with it. Atlantic gave a lot of money in the last 2 years on health care. A lot of money. There were a group of nonprofits who brought together what were called HCAN, H-C-A-N, which brought together a group of people working of nonprofits, and we gave a lot of money to them. Well, some kind of health care passed. But if it hadn't, and is what passed better, I don't know. But we do a lot of advocacy.
And effective.
And it's effective. But it's a lot of money.
Well, folks, we just had a fabulous couple of hours, I think, and I hope you do too. Let's thank Elizabeth and Charlie.